Hi guys, number one Marmaduke fan here. I heard the news at lunch today that Rush Limbaugh passed away, so I just kind of wanted to share my personal thoughts on it. So, of course, before I checked Twitter, I knew what I was going to see, which was that there would be lots of kind of mainstream Republican figures, mainstream conservative figures who would be using this opportunity to kind of eulogize Rush, talk about his impact on the movement, talk about his impact on American politics, his talents as a broadcaster. And I knew that not just random Joes, but elites, journalists, and intellectuals on the left would be using the death of Rush Limbaugh as an opportunity to sort of spit on his grave as he passed away, and as an opportunity to bring up like every mean or nasty joke that Rush Limbaugh ever told, and to hang this as an albatross around the neck of anyone who ever listened to Rush Limbaugh, liked Rush Limbaugh, spoke to Rush Limbaugh, had their career helped by Rush Limbaugh. So, one of the reasons I wanted to talk about this is uh, I listened to Rush Limbaugh as a kid. He was like a big thing in on the radio of like my household growing up. I kind of feel like he was a big thing in my entire part of the country. And in some ways, if you can put the political side of Rush Limbaugh aside and look at him as a talented broadcaster, I really do think he foreshadows some things about the 2020s, like the 21st century, in really interesting ways. It's sort of like really talented people from one era do things that become more common or more accepted or a bigger part of a later era. So one of those, I think, would be the podcast generation, where if you think about it, Rush Limbaugh spoke to people who were kind of blue collar Americans driving to work, or if you worked as a truck driver, if you worked as a delivery guy, if you worked as a mail guy, Rush Limbaugh was the jam for a lot of those kinds of people. And that kind of foreshadows how podcasts have become a way for the American blue collar guy to educate himself or herself today. The podcast explosion has really unleashed a lot of creative thought and political dialogue for the maybe uneducated or just moderately educated working man to expose himself to. I think another thing about Rush Limbaugh is he foreshadowed a lot of the issues about comedy and cancel culture, where going back to the 90s, there would be issues where someone would say he's saying this inappropriate thing, and I don't believe anyone should be allowed to say that kind of thing. And then when they'd play the clip of him saying it, you'd laugh if you had a sense of humor because you get it's a joke, it's an inappropriate joke, maybe it's a wildly inappropriate joke, and maybe it's very rude, but you pick up the humor of the situation. And part of the humor of the situation is the moral fuddy-duddy who doesn't get the joke and is just very serious and puritanical about it. They actually add to the humor of the situation. And I think Rush, no more than any other person alive, has kind of like illustrated how, at least within my lifetime, the situation has changed. When I was a young child, the religious right hated South Park. Christian Midwestern moms wanted it off the air. It was blaspheming Jesus Christ. The religious right despised South Park and really actively fought to get it off television. You fast forward to today, and South Park has kind of gained this sort of cult status in conservative and libertarian circles because of the South Park's writers' willingness to make fun of Islam, to make fun of the intellectual elite, to make fun of the sacred cows of the left. So I don't endorse blaspheming Jesus Christ, but I can at least respect that as parodyists, South Park are willing to parody everybody, including the sacred cows of the left, as well as the religious right. That's kind of a microcosm, I think, of how things have changed. When I was a child, the religious right felt very censorious. It felt very fundamentalist. It felt very concerned about Satanism or witchcraft in the cartoons or Dungeons and Dragons. And when I look at the right today, it feels much more liberal. Not in the political sense of the term, but maybe in the sense of being liberal as a virtue, more charitable, more open to different ideas. When I look for political dialogue where I'm trying to find people of different sides. If I say I'm going to on purpose find someone who disagrees with me and listen to them, I either have to go directly to a left wing source or I have to listen to a right wing alternative media source where they have dialogues and where they have these exchanges. I can't find a left wing source that will have a Rush Limbaugh on, or have a Ben Shapiro on, or have any kind of controversialist right wing figure on, or even kind of maybe a more reserved and polite right wing figure on. It feels like if you were a liberal who just said, let these people talk, let's have it out, let's have this marketplace of ideas, uh, your home was the Democrat Party in the 90s, but during the lifetime of Rush Limbaugh, uh, that's changed. I feel like the Dave Rubins and the Jordan Petersons, who saw themselves as leftists, got chased out of that. They don't say they're conservatives. They don't really like everything about the conservative movement. They don't agree with everything in the conservative movement, but they've kind of been forced by default to move in that direction because they sort of see this shut down the speech element of the modern left that's emerged, and that's a change. And I think Rush Limbaugh independently had a direct effect on that. They were trying to cancel him back in the 90s during the first wave of political correctness. It happened again during the second wave of political correctness. And even if you could say this thing he said is inappropriate, that thing he said is inappropriate, it kind of doesn't matter because the cancel culture dialogue is a bigger dialogue than Rush Limbaugh and anything he said during his career. And I've kind of reached the point where cancel culture is such an evil, even if we could have a serious dialogue on, was Rush Limbaugh helpful to the religious right? Was his brand of politics harmful to the religious right? I would say I view that in kind of like the context of this bigger overarching problem of cancel culture. So if you're a cancel culture warrior or a cancel culture apologist, you don't get to have that conversation with me about was every joke that Rush Limbaugh ever told decent or not? Were some of the things he said not meant to be jokes, and were they wrong? I'll have that conversation with a serious Christian with whom I share a worldview. I cannot have that conversation with someone who is just an opportunist. I cannot have a conversation about decency with someone who doesn't believe that you should speak of the dead with a little reverence and a little respect, even if you strongly disapprove of things they said or did during their life. Maybe that's one final point: is how should you speak of the dead? And I do think this is just an issue where we live in a post-Christian culture. If you live in sort of a Christian culture of the early 1900s or the late 1800s, of course you speak of the dead with reverence. Death is an evidence of sin. It's this very final, tragic thing. And you do want to talk about evil of the past. You don't want to forgive or gloss over evil of the past. But you do want to kind of like treat death with a little somberness, with a little respect. Where do you get that from, say, Darwinian evolution? Where do you get that from natural materialism? A dead body is just a dead body. Why speak about the dead with respect? In fact, if you hated their guts while they were alive, why not express how much you hate their guts when they're dead? So that phenomenon, I think, is sort of an effect of us moving of the post-Christian culture sort of just creeping out into the rest of the world. It's so common now that I know it's going to happen before I even look. There was a little of this when Ruth Bader Ginsburg died. There was a little of this when John McCain died on the far right. The anti-neocon, anti-war hawks would sometimes like meme about how they were happy that John McCain was dead. So you could say that as the right is becoming a bit more postmodern, as the right is maybe becoming a post-Christian right, we may see a lot more of this. We might see a little bit more celebrating the death of prominent left-wing figures and activists on the right. And for me as a Christian, I don't like any of it because a human soul always has value. A human soul is always made in the image of God. So I'm concerned for this Christian principle. But at the same time, we're sinking into, uh, I think, like a really dark reality, or what looks like the end of the republic. Maybe that's kind of like the final point about Rush Limbaugh is, in a way, I think he represents the absolute best of the baby boomer right. And I would point to kind of like good humor and optimism as valuable traits. And if I contrast that with what like say Gen Zs, a lot of the Gen Z kind of like right wing political dialoguers I hear, actually right and left, are very afraid of the end coming. They feel like the end is coming very soon. If it's on the left, it's fear of environmentalism is going to destroy us very soon. If it's on the right, the fear that our civilization is going to collapse like the Roman Empire. It's coming. Economic collapse is coming. This is a real palpable fear. It's not just a conspiracy. There's serious problems that could cause the collapse of our republic. But I feel like there is a value in just kind of like the laughter of a character like Rush Limbaugh, but maybe with his death. I don't know who on the. I don't think there's any Zoomers who are a Rush Limbaugh figure. I've seen Zoomers who are, controversialists and willing to say, these shocking and controversial things. I've seen young guys like Ben Shapiro who can talk really fast and are really articulate and really good data wonks, but none of them are a Rush Limbaugh in terms of being able to combine everything into one package of both humor and thoughtful analysis and great delivery, a golden radio voice. Maybe Rush Limbaugh is just one of these guys who there's not always going to be one of them every generation. Maybe he's the kind of guy who only comes once every 100 years instead of once every generation. But it's a sad moment. It was every time a prominent figure dies, I have basically prepared myself for the reality that there's going to be disgusting things on Twitter. But I guess my final takeaway is I'm past the point where I care if people are being indecent on Twitter anymore. That's a new reality. Cancel culture is here as a new reality because technology and the internet have given us the power to use it as a weapon to hurt one another. If human nature is sinful, then we can't expect people to just instantly start acting decently and not use it to cancel and hurt one another. There goes the water in my creepy basement area. It wouldn't be the #1 Marmaduke fan show if we didn't have weird audio problems. But anyway, where I was going with that is I am not going to worry ever again about a person who says so-and-so said something racist, sexist, homophobic, because I have not found the left-winger in good faith who is willing to have a conversation about that as if they were serious about finding the truth of the matter. I'd like to believe that there are well-intentioned people who really do want to talk about problems like sexism or racism or homophobia, but since I can't find that well-intentioned person, it's sort of like the evil of cancel culture is the evil, I think, of the 21st century that we're going to have to deal with. That it's a greater evil, I think, than any of the evils that get brought up by the left in these political dialogues. At the same time, I kind of want to add a strange caveat to this. So I've been listening to C.S. Lewis a lot recently, and one of the things that really strikes me about C.S. Lewis is his ability to talk about a problem for Christians without falling into a left versus right trap. It's almost as if when C.S. Lewis looked at a problem, he tried to look past just here are the pros and here are the cons of the situation. He would ask things like, what do this group of people believe and why do they believe it? And what do this group of people believe and why do they believe it? And what was really good about that is it let C.S. Lewis look at a problem where two different groups might want the same thing for very different reasons. Two different groups might oppose dissecting animals for very different reasons. One could oppose dissecting animals because they care for animals, and one could oppose dissecting animals because they value animal life more than they value human life. And maybe someone could support dissecting animals because they believe, soberly that, this isn't any, it's not good to dissect animals, but if we can use it to save human lives, that will have an important value. But someone could also support dissecting animals because they just don't think anything matters. All that matters is the march of progress. It's utilitarian. It's useful. I could dissect people and not feel any compunction about it either. And Lewis would understand that those are two very different reasons for supporting or opposing something. So, could so let, what can we say about Rush Limbaugh? Could he have added to a more heated dialogue, or maybe a world where personal insult is more common? I don't know. I don't know if I'd blame Rush. He participated in that. He was an insult comic, but I really don't think it's fair to blame him for that situation for two important reasons. One, he kind of did it as a reaction to the leftist mainstream media of the 80s and 90s, which back then was unopposed. No internet, no podcast. If Dan Rather said so, then it was so, and nobody on TV was going to contradict Dan Rather, and he spoke in a serious voice, so he must be a good journalist. And second, I really think you can look at Rush Limbaugh as a talented comedian. When I saw the tweet circulating where it's, he said this awful thing and this awful thing and this awful thing, I just instantly thought of guys like Bill Burr, Dave Chappelle, Louis C.K., not conservative Christian types of guys. A lot of them very vocal about their dislike of Trump, very vocal about their dislike of the religious right, but because they're comics, it's sort of like that allows them the space to tell inappropriate jokes. And I just don't see the argument for how you can say Rush Limbaugh is a wicked, pernicious influence on American life that you would not inevitably have to enforce with equal vigor on comedians who also say and do inappropriate things, basically to get us to laugh, but also to provoke us to think as we're laughing. Now, maybe that's the point. Maybe in a postmodern culture, we can't have consistent standards. Maybe in a postmodern culture, we have to give up on asking people to play fair and use the same standard when talking about one guy as they talk about another guy. But I've basically kind of moved past the point where I care, or I can have my day ruined by someone being mean on Twitter. So the final takeaway is cancel culture is not just interested in hurting you personally in your ordinary life. Cancel culture is interested in being on the right side of history and making sure you're on the wrong side of history. And I think the important thing for Rush Limbaugh is they're doing it to him because he was a conservative, and because he was a conservative whose sense of humor was very raucous and mean. He didn't have a problem being mean to the people he was making fun of, many times deservedly, maybe sometimes unfairly. But the same thing that's been done to Rush Limbaugh is now everyone. He was sort of like the figurehead of cancel culture in the 1990s. Rush Limbaugh's problem in the 1990s is basically going to be everyone's problem, high, middle, and low class, for the rest of the 21st century. And even if you don't approve of him, I think not allowing yourself to be canceled, doing everything within your power to keep going and to keep talking and to tell even more inappropriate jokes when they try to get you for telling one inappropriate joke, I think that is something that should be respected and imitated, left, right, and center. If you're on the left and you hate Rush Limbaugh's politics, you should not allow yourself to be shamed into silence if you think something is true. So that's the universal principle that applies to anybody, regardless of political ideology. I don't think communists should be canceled. I think communists should have the freedom of conscience to say why they think communism is true, maybe even to say wildly inappropriate things. Oop, are we dead? Are we dead? No, I think we're still here. Okay, so to that degree, I'm a classical liberal. Maybe classical liberalism is dying. Maybe the rise of the new right means that classical liberalism can't work, and maybe the only thing the left and the right agree on anymore is that the classical liberal system isn't working. Maybe that's all gonna collapse. But if there's a baby in the bathwater in classical liberalism, I think it's let people talk and let people tell their jokes, even if it's inappropriate, because we cannot trust anyone to be the arbiter of who will and won't get canceled for this or that inappropriate thing they said. I don't think that means it's not. So what people say is, well, does that mean there's no accountability? There's no being held responsible for your actions or your words. I think the difference is what you do versus words versus deeds, and I think that's been blurred by the left, where words have become a form of violence or a form of action in mainstream left-wing intellectual thought. If you tell a joke, and everybody can tell it's a joke, I basically think that's sacrosanct. There should be no cancellation for that. If you're making arguments, address the argument. If you're making an atrocious or immoral argument, address the argument and then also add the moral condemnation. But don't fail to address the argument before you make the moral condemnation of the immoral belief system, because that's the only way you're going to win any respect. That's the only way you're going to persuade the person who believes immoral things that they should stop believing those immoral things. You can't stop a Nazi by telling him, you bad Nazi. He knows he's a Nazi. You have to tell him why being a Nazi is wrong, why thinking like a Nazi is wrong, if you want to redeem the Nazi, if you'd like him to stop being a Nazi. I basically feel like the challenge of the 21st century is we've accepted the idea that you don't need to go after the idea if you can fundamentally destroy the person. I don't see any solution to that. Maybe for centuries, maybe forever. But Rush Limbaugh was not a Nazi. And so, because he's not, that's basically how high the standard has gone. If you're not a Nazi, I just don't care what else you have to say about him after that point. The age of the internet and how awful it is has stopped me from caring what anybody has to say negative about anybody else, unless they're actually a Nazi. And even if they are a Nazi, the punishment for being a Nazi should be people should tell you you're dumb and persuade you to not be a Nazi, and you shouldn't. I guess the reason this is going to be my closing thought. One of the reasons I want to talk about this is I really do see a rise in a kind of like alt-right dimension that I'm really afraid isn't just a couple cranks on the internet. I'm really afraid that the alt-right is actually something serious, something growing, something that could be an ascendant movement on the right. And I see Rush Limbaugh as kind of a figure opposed to that in the conservative mindset. So it's kind of sad that he's dead. He represented some good things, I think, about the American conservative mindset, especially like the humorous side of it. But with his death, I think we also see maybe the potential of everything getting worse. We're all doomed, but maybe we're all doomed, but that's no reason to despair and be a doomer. We don't know what's going to happen in the future, so why worry about it? With that, I'm number one Marmaduke fan. I love you guys. Feel free to yell at me in the comments, and I even love you weirdos too. Catch you later.